Oh, that's new. All right. Good morning, everybody. Doop, doop, doo.
Good morning.
Hey, Rosie. Good to see you again. Hi, everybody else. Let me get up
Yeah.
chat. It is actually still morning, which is good. I don't have really large fingers. It's just my camera's down there, so it makes it looks like it's a big tarantula or something. We'll give people a moment or two to roll in. Doo, doo. And then we'll get cracking. All right, I hope you're all doing well and are fully rested and prepared for what will be a roller coaster ride of genetics. I'm gonna share my screen with you lot. All right, the clock has started. So, welcome to Genetics for Summer 2021. Yeah, this is going to be wild. I'm Dr. Matt Crook, obviously your teacher, because I'm the one, chatting and stuff. What I'm going to do for this lecture period is primarily go through, for people who haven't had me before, where all the different stuff is. I'm not sure we'll have a look at the syllabus because that's kind of dull, but certainly have a look at the schedule, kind of take you through different things where you'll find stuff, expectations, so on and so forth. Right, so kind of fairly standard humdrum stuff. Some of you I know have had trouble getting access to this course on Blackboard for some reason. I don't really know why. But in the meantime, I've sent those who have contacted me the links to kind of join this, obviously. And hopefully they'll get fixed soon. And if it isn't, then we'll just deal with any issues kind of as they arise, right? So don't stress about deadlines and stuff. We'll deal with that. Right, but for everybody else who does have access, this is kind of what it looks like, right? So essentially, there's going to be a bunch of places to find stuff and a bunch of information and a bunch of different kind of sources of information. So the plan is that I give you as many different ways of kind of learning this material as possible. So obviously, being here is a really important one, and not because you'll get to stare, at my sumptuous beard or, kind of fun t-shirts that my wife buys me every birthday or Father's Day or whatever. I think she's trying to tell me something. I'm just not sure what. Um, but main reason is that we will, in this Zoom lecture thing, spend time going through the more nuggety issues or concepts that we will be covering, right? So this is where I get the chance to really kind of dive into some of the trickier concepts, spend time explaining them, and probably equally importantly, kind of field questions from you lot, right? So I know how I understand this stuff because I've been teaching it for a while, but also because I know how my brain works, right? And amazingly, over the last many years, haha, not going to tell you how old I am, uh, I've learned that not everyone thinks the way that I do, right? And so you asking me questions is how I figure out whether or not I'm teaching this to you in a way that you can understand, right? And so not understanding something is not an issue at all, right? It's totally normal, right? Because otherwise you'd have already done genetics and you would not be here. Easy peasy, right? But most likely there's stuff that, just doesn't kind of make sense, right? And whatever way that I've chosen to teach you it doesn't click, right? Which is pretty normal. So this is where you get to ask me those questions and go, ha, 3-point cross, what the hell is that? I don't understand that. Can you go through that in a different way? And we'll spend time going through it, right? So these, I'm kind of preaching to the converted, right, in a sense, because, you're all here listening to me. So you all kind of hopefully get the importance of logging in. And so that's really like the big plus of attending on Zoom. Now, you don't have to have your videos on if you don't want to. I really don't mind. You can mute yourselves while I'm talking, but anytime and that's largely because I mean I've got a cat that will probably appear in a while and it will yowl at me, right? And so that's distracting enough for me. But if you all have cats and dogs and stuff which are making noise, then it's kind of just a little disruptive. But you don't have to like raise a hand. Just unmute your microphone and say something. Actually, I've got to bring the chat back up again. There you go. No, really, I want the chat back up again. Oh, damn it. Zoom is such a pain in the ass sometimes. There it is. All right, you can't see this. This is like, secret sauce for the professor, but now I got my chat up. And also the chat box is something that I'm like looking at down there. So that if you have any questions, but you don't feel comfortable, ask them or whatever, right? Just type them in the chat box and I will see them most likely, as you type them, and if not, after a few minutes. Okay, so that's this, right? You'll also hear funny anecdotes about all kinds of fun things. I've got a whole raft of dad jokes, which I'm particularly proud of, and so on and so forth, right? So it's kind of, I try and make this entertaining as much as I can while still doing my job, because this is a pretty heavy lift every day for all of you, right? So this first session is an hour. We have 15 minutes break. We'll use a second Zoom link to have our second lecture, which is an hour and a quarter, right? So even just one of those a day is like enough. But 2 in one day, one after the other, is going to be pretty exhausting. So that 15 minutes is basically to make me get off my ass and go and stretch my legs and not sit in front of a computer all day. And also makes it a little easier with the whole kind of Zoom video conversion YouTube thing, if it's not 1 2.5 hour long video. And then we're going to have half-hour break after our second lecture, and then we'll have lab, which will be via the third link, right, which are all sent out in that announcement or an email, right? So it's going to be tough, right? And it's, I would fully recommend stocking up on like coffee, Monster, Red Bull, tea, if you're a tea person, or whatever, because this will be a pretty intense kind of experience, right? So me chuntering away at you on your screen is one way, right? Asking questions too. I literally cannot recommend enough asking questions. Usually a students that ask questions pass the class. I don't know, that's correlation, right? It's not causation. But if you engage in the class, you ask questions, you clarify issues that don't make sense to you, your chance of passing this class goes, way up. So strongly recommended. Also the chat box session, whatever it's called, file, that will get posted to Blackboard, right? So on Blackboard, there's a bunch of places that, you've done this before, you need to know where to go. One of the main ones is the course content folder, right? So this has all of the PowerPoints that we'll be working through, right? So they're all here. You can have a look through them ahead of time. Actually strongly recommended at least kind of looking through these before class, right? So before class on Thursday, because you don't have time now, obviously, have a look through these, we're going to be going through Mendelian genetics on Thursday, and this is a reminder saying, "Hey, go teach your class." I'm like, okay, I am teaching my class. See, I have a terrible memory, so I have reminders for everything. Yeah, so read through these. Mendelian genetics we're doing on Thursday. Have a look through it, and at the least, it will help what we go through be less of a surprise. Right, so you'll get an idea of the general concepts, even if you don't actually absorb very much, right? That's not necessarily the point. You can actually do some fairly intensive work if you wish, making lists of stuff that you don't understand, like things you have to pay particular attention to. That's one way of doing it. Another, if you're a fan of like podcasts and stuff, this isn't actually a podcast because I don't know how to do that because I'm particularly technically inept. But all of those PowerPoints have more or less matching, I don't know, audiobook type things, right? Me talking through them, going through them slide by slide, right? These may not perfectly match the PowerPoints anymore because, the PowerPoints kind of evolve over time. And so far, none of the changes other than for the transgenics one at the end, which I'll probably need to redo, or at least number 18 maybe. Have changed enough to warrant redoing them, right? So they're not a perfect match, but they're pretty close, kind of like chimpanzee versus Homo sapiens kind of match, 98% or so. Get a bit of a genetics joke in there. Okay, so that's another thing, and this is actually a course copy, so I forgot to delete all the stuff from last summer, so it's still there. I'll actually go through and actually use my pen. Make myself a note, because again, I'll forget otherwise. Pics from summer. There you go. So all of the pictures, and the chat files, right, which contain questions, my answers to those questions if I'm typing them out. Sometimes I'll have like definitions that I put in there, which are handy to refer to, whatever might be interesting, bad jokes maybe, right? So those will get posted here, right? So you can kind of see what this looks like. This is my whiteboard, which is funny. So I literally do this and go, there you go. There's my whiteboard. You can actually see a really cute armadillo that my daughter made me for Christmas. Crochet, I think it is. Anyway, so anything that we do in class in terms of working through stuff. So this must have been for our linkage. Yeah, these are some 2 and 3 point crosses. Scare yourself if you want to go look at those. Anything that we go through in class gets posted online, right? So the last thing, where's YouTube gone? Here we go. The last thing is, yeah, that is the last thing. Yeah, that's right. Kind of. Got other stuff to go through. All of these videos, and you can see this actually, you can actually see how my wife has changed the decor of the room, which is kind of funny. This is like my office, which is actually a couch. And so, yeah, all of these get posted to YouTube as soon as I do the first one, which will probably be this afternoon after we finish lab, because probably won't have time in between all the other stuff. I'll send you the playlist link. You actually go through all of these too. You just have to go to whatever my YouTube, there you go, Wandering Professor name is. And you could watch like semesters of genetics. How fun would that be? Like all the different ways in which I teach the same material over and over again. Or you could just wait for the playlist link to come through and you can watch these ones. So this is really the idea behind this. Let me find the other thing back again. Is if you can't make class, and I obviously strongly recommend that you do, but if you can't for whatever reason, right, you have some other conflict, work schedule changes, kids are sick, whatever, don't stress too much. You'll be able to catch up using those YouTube videos. It's not going to be quite the same as actually being here, obviously, or being here. But it will hopefully take a little bit of the stress and strain off of, you know, if you do need to miss class for whatever reason. And the same we'll do for every lecture period and for the lab as well. But I'll go through that in the lab itself. Okay, so anybody got any questions so far? I usually ask that because I get thirsty when I have a drink. Makes for a good stopping period.
I had a quick question about the homework schedule.
Ooh, yeah. The homeworks or the schedule of the homeworks?
Schedule of the homeworks.
All right. So, yeah, so this is the latest schedule. So if you downloaded this, I think I actually did all of the uploads before I sent the link around. So hopefully you've got this version to hand because this is the latest version. What's the question?
Oh, the version that I downloaded, I guess, from the site has it cut off after Thursday. So I only saw the due dates for homework 1 and 2 and homework 6, and I was confused on the rest of the due dates.
That's weird.
So
So give it a shot again. If you still have a problem, just send me an email and I'll send you a copy of it.
Okay.
Yeah. So the due dates are a little bit wonky. And the reason for that is because I had to go through and make sure that we've actually covered the material that's in the homeworks before the due date for the homework occurs, right? And so that's why they're not, you know, kind of super evenly spaced through. But that does lead me on to the next point. Thank you, Rosie, sorry. Where are we? There we go. Oh shit, better get those out. Yeah, delete that exam. It'll be different anyway. Ah, crap it. All right. I'll go back and fix that later. Second note, delete the exams. That gets a couple of stars and exclamation marks. See? Anyway, they'll be different. You're not going to gain an awful lot by doing that. Oh, you know what I could do? This is like behind the scenes look at secret professor stuff. I really should have checked that. I was just so relieved that the course transfer actually worked, because Blackboard is not a particularly intuitive thing to use. Actually, after 4 years of farting around with it, I'm actually somewhat competent at using it, somewhat. So you might find things which like, what the hell? And most likely that's just a mistake on my behalf. So if you do find any issues, like due dates not matching, I've gone through everything and I've thought I've fixed stuff, but you know, there's always the risk that I haven't. So another thing that you're going to be doing for the lecture, right? We'll talk about the stuff that you'll be doing for lab when we, you know, start lab at 2. Are these homeworks, right? So these homeworks are they're not really quizzes as such, right? Obviously, you get assigned a grade for them, but they are really an attempt to kind of help you keep up to date and up to speed on terminology, basic concepts, facts, the stuff that you need to know, right? So that's kind of like their main purpose there. And that's why they're interspersed kind of throughout the schedule, right? And also the deadlines for that material will be before the exam that material that covers that material, right? So there's really a revision aid, right? So it's to kind of force you to go back, look through your notes, look through the material, and figure out answers to different questions, like matching, fill in the blank, what does this do? What does that do? Work out this problem, stuff like that. Kind of thing which you'll get from questions at the back of each chapter in the textbook, for example, right? So that's the main purpose of the homeworks. And the secondary purpose is to give you a opportunity to build your grade outside of the exams, right? So exams, I wouldn't say they murder people because that obviously wouldn't be the intent, but they are hard, right? They're time limited, open book, and are hard exams, right? Because we're studying a hard subject, right? Which you will need a pretty good grasp of before you go into the next courses in your kind of course schedule, right? Next one after this for most people is either microbiology or evolution, right? And so both of those courses rely on a pretty solid foundation of genetics, right? So success here equals success there. However, I don't want to make exams the only way by which I assess your understanding of the material, right? Or your abilities as a geneticist. Because it isn't. Exams also test your abilities at taking exams, which is something I have no interest in whatsoever, right? So these homeworks are really another way in which you can show your understanding and work towards your grade, right? So you can kind of like just bank them away. They're 25 points each. I think the course, yeah, the lecture alone is like 1,000 points. Each exam is 200 points. And all the homeworks together, I think, shit, I actually suck at math. I should have the syllabus open in front of me. And that, if you want to know the numbers, look at the syllabus. That's kind of like the usual answer. But overall, for the actual course, right, including the lab, these homeworks make up 20% of your grade, right? And that's a pretty significant chunk, right? So do them all, right? Don't leave anything on the table, right? These are like kind of easy points, and use them to kind of, study this material, right? This isn't a course where you can cram the night before the exam and do well. This is a course where you have to constantly be going over this material, constantly studying, constantly revising, and working on. It's a very hard course to succeed in, right? Because it is a hard subject, right? And it's a particularly hard subject if you're coming from like lower division courses like Gen Bio 1 or 2, right? Because we are going deep into the subject, right? A lot of detail, some really kind of tricky concepts to get, some pretty foundational stuff. So this is a good way, these things, of building your grade. Obviously, the lab is another way, right? The lab is 25% of your course grade, right? So that whatever you get in the lab as a percentage gets converted into 25% of your overall course grade. And the lecture portion, like the bit that we're talking about now, is 75%. Right, so overall, your exams make up 55% of your grade. So technically you can pass this class with a C or better while doing like so-so in your exams, but you have to be consistently so-so to get a C or better in your exams, right? But the homeworks in the lab basically act to bring up your grade. So don't forget those. They're very, very, very important. Okay, so that's that. This will also be where your exams are. So if you've obviously found out. Exams are online. Ta-da! Just there. And you'll have an hour and 15 minutes, unless you have accommodations from DSS, to take those exams, right? They are hard exams, partly because of the material, partly because of the online format, right? And so you'll answer each question in turn. As soon as you click onto the next question, the question that you just answered or not is no longer available. You cannot go back. Also, the order is randomized. That's partly to discourage cheating, which hopefully won't be an issue, but is always a temptation, right? So that's the reason for that not being able to go back deal, right? So you can't call up a friend and say, hey, what did you get for such and such, right? I don't like thinking about things like that, but it's unfortunately something that I do need to think about. Those exams will be made available the morning of the, whenever the exam is, and they'll be available until midnight. And you'll have an hour and 15 minutes to take them. So go somewhere quiet that you have good internet connection, and there you go. Typically, the answers will be available usually like 2 or 3 days after the due date of the exam. The reason for that little lag is if anyone has any kind of like last minute, oh crap, I can't make this, but they couldn't let me know in time, then they can still do the exam within that 2 to 3 days, right? If you do not contact me, right, if you don't take the exam and you don't contact me within a couple of days, and that exam then like the answers become available to the class, you cannot make up your exam, right? This is an issue that has happened a couple of times since we've gone online. It's like, I can't do a makeup exam because I'd have to write you a whole new exam, right? Just for you. And each exam takes, I don't know, 5 or 6 hours to make. I spend a lot of time thinking about these things. And also wouldn't be the same exam as everybody else took, right? So if you do have any issues making an exam for whatever reason, you've got like some, tree fell on the internet lines, or I don't know, kind of cat knocked over coffee onto the router or whatever, right? I'm not going to be like really mean about the reason, but you have to let me know soon, because as soon as the answers for the exam become available, you will not be able to make up your exam. Okay, just wanted that to be kind of clear. Don't want any surprises. So boop-a-doo, where are we at? Here be, oh, actually, before I forget, got a terrible memory, so I kind of bounce around a lot. Master learning goals. So this is essentially a study guide for the whole course. It really is a list of stuff you should know, right? So use that, go through it, and figure out whether you know it or not. That's basically the idea, right? So that's there. What else is there? These things are usually, I add them for you to use during exams. So guess what? You'll probably be doing a, yeah, let's get rid of that. I'll probably change it anyway. Anyway, a chi-squared test in your exams, right? So this kind of gives you an idea of the stuff that you will be doing. Okay. All right, syllabus tells you all the, bits and pieces, which kind of already told you anyway. It's not really pretty straightforward stuff. Schedule, super important. And it's super important because this is where you find out where all of your exam dates and due dates for homeworks and what we'll be studying on a particular day is, right? This shouldn't change too much, right? Because you know, we don't have much time to change anything, and I don't think we're going to have any like crazy snowmageddon snowstorms over the summer. Fingers crossed. It wasn't a lot of fun last time. So it's pretty unlikely that this will change, but if it does, I'll post up the changed version to Blackboard and send an announcement out telling you that I've changed it, right? To give you an opportunity to download it. We're going to be doing an exam every 2 weeks, by and large, right? It is going to be full on, like super intense. And our last exam will be on the last day of classes. Now we can actually, well, think about that actually. I might, you know what I might do? I might actually change this to being, you say, no need to change the schedule, right? I might actually change that to the following day. But I'll have a think about that, make a note. Because it's always a bit of a bear to have an exam on the same day that you learn the material. It doesn't give you any opportunity to go through it. Right, so I just need to check, what would that be? 28th July. Just need to check that there isn't going to be any issues with that. There shouldn't be in terms of study days and stuff like that. But I can't do that right now. So I'll do that this afternoon, add it to my list. And I will let you all know if that has changed. Typically, that's how I normally do it, but it's kind of not ideal. So if I can move it a little bit later, that will at least give you a chance to learn all this stuff, anything that we covered. And we could just use that as a catch-up session. That would work too. Right, so these are where all your homeworks are due. The dates should be correct on Blackboard. There's always a risk that they aren't, so let me know if something doesn't work right. And roughly speaking, these are things that we'll be going over in each class session. So 1 is the first lecture, 2 is the second lecture, basically, right? There's always a good chance that we don't finish something or we finish something early. Rarely do we finish something early, but quite often, you know, won't be able to finish all of a particular subject on a particular day. And so it will just roll over into the next class session, right? So this is a pretty accurate schedule, but again, it is subject to change, right? So make sure you have a copy of that looks like this, Rosie. Must be some, our Blackboard is such like pain in the ass. The worst education software I've ever used, but it's what we've got to use.
I figured it out.
You did?
Yeah.
Cool. I just blame on Blackboard, Rosie. That's the usual. I think that's pretty much it, really. Anybody got any questions about any of this stuff?
Do you have any extra credit opportunities during this course or no?
Almost certainly. Oh, bloody hell, my chat box has disappeared. Sorry, whoever asked that question. I'll get to you in a second. The only extra credit opportunity will be a bribe from me to you to fill out your SRIs, which is like worth 20 points or something. It's basically worth a grade in one of your exams. And that's just so I get a decent number of respondents so that my SRIs are kind of meaningful, essentially. That's it. And so good question, Mr. Robert. I like the tag, by the way. And that really kind of reinforces the importance of staying on top of the material, right? Because if you tank exam 1, like really bomb it, it's like, well, that sucks. But due to the homeworks and the lab making up a pretty decent chunk of the course, you can deal with that and still get a good grade. You might not be able to get an A anymore, maybe, but it shouldn't stop you from passing the class with a C or better, right? If you tank exam 2, things get a lot more serious, right? And that's also a good point too. If you're struggling after exam one, you're like, what the hell? Like, this isn't going well. Contact me, right? It's part of my job to help you succeed, right? Obviously can't make you succeed, but I can help you. But I can't help you succeed if you do that after tanking exam 1s, 2, and 3, right? Because by that point, the math is just not in your favor, right? And so you got to really stay on top of this stuff. And I don't know, what that's all about, right? So this is what I do, right? This is my, oh, there you go. Give my dog a heartworm medication because otherwise I forget, right? So I've got all of this stuff in here. Obviously, I don't have exam on certain day kind of deadlines because I go to the schedule and I go, shit, when's exam 1 again? And it'll tell me, right? And so I'll remember to get the exam set up, and I kind of know by now that they should be by a certain time. But put everything in this schedule in whatever you use for a calendar, right? Put a reminder. Exam 1 is on Thursday the 17th, which is not very long away. Put a reminder for that for the 3 days ahead of time, right? Because you've got to study this over and over and over again until you feel comfortable with it. Because if you're not, then some of those questions on the exams will you'll miss them. Things that you should be able to answer, you won't be able to answer. All right, Dipper. Doop doop doo. Question from Dipper about taking notes. So I don't use any kind of screen lockout software or whatever. I know that such stuff does exist, but again, I'm not really big on technology. And also, it being open book is not as much of a boon as you think it might be, right? Because that is taken into account in the exam. So in every exam that I give you, there will be a bunch of basic recall stuff, right? Which you can just go tappy tappy tap on Google, and you could probably find the answer, right? But that is maybe like 50% of the exam, let's say, right? A good 30% of the exam will be stuff that makes you think a bit, right? About the material, about the concepts, about like what I'm talking about, or makes you work through calculations similar to ones that we've worked through in class, like 3-point crosses, for example, or chi-square tests, or whatever, or kind of Mendelian inheritance type questions. And there will be about 20% of the exam will be tough questions where I will give you some information and there's going to be a chunk of stuff that you need to supply in the middle to get to the answer which I give you in the multiple choice or multiple answer for the question. And so if you do not understand what we're talking about or what I'm asking you, you will not be able to get from one to the other. Right? For example, I'll give you a bunch of data and get you to do a chi-square test. Now, to do that properly, you need to know how to work out degrees of freedom. You'll need to know how to work out a chi-square value, and you'll need to know how to use a chi-square table or chart to turn those two things into a p-value. And then you'll pick one of those p-values that I give you. So there's absolutely no way you can figure out what that answer is without actually doing it, and you can't do it unless you know how to do it, right? So that's one way in which it being open book is not going to be much of a boon. The second is that just as if you were taking this in class, these exams are time limited. And so every moment that you spend looking up the easy stuff on Google, like the basic recall stuff, you will not have to answer the difficult questions like working out a three-point cross, because they're equally weighted in terms of points, but they don't take the same amount of time to answer, right? So it being an open book exam is, just forget about the fact that it's open book, right? So make notes. You can make them on the PowerPoint if that helps. You can make them like on, type on your laptop or whatever. You can do them on paper and pen. It doesn't really matter. Make notes, make a list of words, right? Kind of vocabulary, right? And use that as material to go back to the PowerPoint and go through material that you've learned in class, right? So this is why it's going to be pretty crazy. So for every, is it 2.25 hours we're going to spend in lecture every day, you should be spending about 5 hours going over that material, at least, minimum, right? This is going to be your job over the summer. Hopefully none of you are taking other classes, and fingers crossed you don't have a full-time job to hold down at the same time, because this is going to take a lot of your time if you wish to be successful, right? There are no shortcuts. There's nothing easy that you can do. It's just hard work. Rewarding, hopefully, because you'll get to learn and understand some real cool stuff. And, kind of thanks, I guess, to COVID. Not sure I'd ever really feel comfortable saying thank you, COVID, but we've got some cool stuff that we'll be learning, which we'll be able to tie into, say, for example, the design of the mRNA vaccine that, I got a month or so ago and my daughter just got yesterday, right? So it's worth it. It's just hard work, right? So hopefully, Dipper, that answers your question. Had another question about supplemental instruction. There will be no SI instructor for this class. As far as I'm aware, they don't. Oh, you're welcome, Dipper. They don't do that for genetics. It's only for GenBio 1 and GenBio 2. There also aren't technically office hours, because in a sense, this is kind of, in a way, part lecture, part office hours too. However, I know that it's not always easy to ask questions, or maybe you don't, you're trying to take so much stuff in that, you don't know what questions to ask. So if any of you need any help outside of class, have any questions about particular material, or concerns or worries about your performance, whatever, just email me and I will set up a one-to-one Zoom meeting with you, right? As needed. So that is, again, also part of my job, right? This is how I try and explain to people who aren't teachers that, the hours I spend teaching aren't just the hours that I work. But that's available. I try not to work weekends, but if that's the only time you can meet, then we'll meet at weekends. If not, we'll meet around the class schedule as needed. But it's also on you to get in contact with me and ask about that, right? I'm not going to go chasing you saying, hey, do you need some help? Right? Because you're all adults, you're all in charge of your own lives. You need to ask me. If you do, you'll find I really try and help my students. I really want you to succeed. I don't want to see any of you, I wouldn't say ever again, because that would be kind of rude. But in genetics again, right? I know some people, for whatever reasons, need to do so, and that's fine. But my aim is to get you as trained as I can get you in genetics and moving on to the next step in your careers, right? So I'm happy to do as much as it takes to make that happen from my end. Obviously, you need to kind of contribute too. Okay, no worries, Dipper. DSS people are super helpful. I really like them, kind of. They keep kicking our asses in the walking challenge every year, so I kind of hold a bit of a grudge against them for that. But in a professional way, it pisses me off every year. In a professional way, they are very, very good at their jobs and very helpful people. So if any of you feel that you might need accommodation, if you have difficulties with exam taking or anything like that, get in contact with them. They're a good bunch of people. Okay. I don't think there's anything else. Oh, yeah, wait till you get the dad jokes. God, you'll be rolling around on the floor. They're the best. My dad, actually, it's funny, my dad keeps sending me dad jokes so that I can tell my kids dad jokes. So I don't know what that makes them, like maybe granddad jokes. Okay, so that's pretty much it from me. We're going to use the last, if anyone has any questions, fire away. Most likely stuff will occur to you as time goes on, so you don't have to think of them now. Oh, another good point as well. One big plus of going over your notes and the material after every class, and I'd suggest doing it at least the day after, if maybe not the same day. You might be a bit sick of genetics by the time we finish at 4 or 4:30 in the afternoon. But certainly the next day, go over your stuff and make a list of questions, right? Go through the material and go, oh, that's easy. Yeah, I know that. Like, oh, what's that all about, right? Make a list, right? And then you bring that list to the next class period and you go, excuse me, what's that mean, right? I don't understand it. And there is time in the schedule to do that. That's built in. It's like when I lived in Colombia, South America for 5 months or so, way back in this is 1999 after I finished my undergraduate degree. And I didn't know how to speak Spanish before I went to South America. Other than that, like you put either an O or an A at the end of every English word and ta-da, you could speak Spanish. That's what my uncle taught me anyway. And so I used to carry around a little like book, notepad type thing with me, and I'd write down every new word that I learned that day, which is obviously a lot to begin with. And then every evening I would go through that and just kind of read them, right? And kind of over and over and over, iteratively, right? And after 3 months or so, I wouldn't say I was fluent. Unfortunately, I never got fluent in Spanish, but I was pretty competent, right? Particularly if I'd had a few beers, but I was pretty competent at speaking Spanish, right? And then I went to Brazil and that was like a complete waste of time. Didn't understand a word anybody was saying. Anyway, so I would suggest a similar kind of thing. Make a vocab list, right? Because we'll be using a very specific language for this course. Obviously it's English, but it's genetics, right? And there are a lot of words that you really have to know what they mean. Otherwise, things are just not going to make sense. Okay? So do that, go over stuff, bring your questions to the next meeting, ask questions away. We can have at least 10, 15 minutes at the beginning of every class period to go over any questions, plus whatever pops up over the course of the lecture period, right? So this is really, I think I can comfortably say that almost everybody that attended Zooms in person, even if they didn't have their videos on last semester, passed with a C or better. Obviously, there were people that didn't that also passed, but they were more in the minority, right? So this is where you can get essentially the benefit of my knowledge and experience, right? Not just in genetics, but also in teaching genetics. Okay. So this isn't going to take long. This is a fairly kind of straightforward PowerPoint. It's really just introducing some terminology, like some of the ways we talk about stuff, and a little bit of history, which is kind of interesting, particularly in terms of women's rights. And you'll also find that I jump around, right? I wouldn't want to look inside my mind, see how it works, but obviously it's not a totally linear process. So I will be jumping around in these PowerPoints. Actually, that came up in an SRI from last spring semester. People found it a little confusing, and I apologize for that. It's not intended to be so. But sometimes something will occur to me like, let's talk about that because that ties neatly into this. And that changes every single time I teach this course. Now, because these PowerPoints are fixed, you know, it's going to appear like I'm bouncing around a lot, but really it's just, you know, kind of teach the subject in the best way I can at that moment. And sometimes that doesn't perfectly match what's in the PowerPoint. Because I don't actually, normally in real life, I don't actually use PowerPoints to teach. I do everything on a whiteboard. So it always looks like I know what I'm talking about because it's, you know, that's all you get to see. Anyway, so in terms of genetics, really, we're talking about traits that are inherited, like things that you see. And that might be being seen as in like something visible, you know, like I've got brown hair and brown eyes, or actually, yeah, it's still mostly brown. I have a certain height, so on and so forth, right? They can also be things that you can't see, right? Another great example is I have a really high tolerance to pain medications, i.e. you have to give me a shit ton of them for them to do anything. I don't even ever bother taking ibuprofen. Like if I fall off my bike and, you know, take some skin off my arm or anything, it's completely pointless because I won't feel any better. My wife feels better because she thinks that she's helping me somehow. But I won't be any difference, right? And so that is a trait, right? How readily you process or respond to analgesics or anesthetics, right? Obviously not something that you can see, but it still is a trait, right? So it's how do we inherit that? How can you look back at your parents and their parents and so on and so forth to see which of them have that trait too, right? Or not, maybe. It might be something that's a lot harder to tease out that way. But also, what causes that trait, right? And for that, we really need to go down to the molecular level, right? So really, genetics is split into the actual things that we're concerned about and their inheritance, and the mechanism behind those things, right? So the inheritance part tends to be on a big scale, right? We're talking about individuals typically, or if we go on to, you know, looking at bigger groups, then population genetics, and if we go into enough time, oh damn it, text message feels like I'm having a fart or something. If we have enough time, then we might even start talking about evolution, right? So that's big scale stuff. But all of that, yeah, apart from like things like, you know, maybe society and so on and so forth, right? Because there obviously is an environmental aspect, but a big chunk of that is caused by the small stuff, right? What is the actual sequence in DNA of that particular gene which has that particular role in that particular process, such that if you change that, right, if there's a change in the DNA, which, unless you're an RNA virus, is the mode by which you inherit that trait, right? What change occurs in that material and what's the consequence of that change, right? Is that a change that changes the protein sequence in such a way that that protein either no longer works or works in a different way, or it works at a low level? Is there a change in how that gene is turned on, right? Such that that protein might not be present when it needs to be, or may be present somewhere where normally it doesn't need to be, right? So what is the mechanism? What's the foundation of that trait? That's the kind of work that I do, right? So I'm really a molecular geneticist. Population genetics is like, oh, to me, you know, I kind of understand it well enough to teach it, even though I won't be teaching in this course, because it's done in evolution instead at this university. But molecular genetics is kind of where I am. It's kind of like logic puzzles. Why does this do this? Does this? Okay, so if that does that, how does that interact with that? Right? It's kind of like figuring out how things work. And it's kind of abstract, right? People can do pretty well with inheritance type genetics because, I mean, you go, hairy arms, right? Which of my ancestors had hairy arms? It's a pretty easy concept to grasp, right? So the first half of the course, give or take, is, yeah, roughly speaking, is on that kind of genetics, kind of inheritance genetics. The second half of the course is on kind of my turf, essentially. It's kind of molecular genetics, biochemistry, control of gene expression, things like that, right? Biotechnology, even transgenics, right? Which you also need to know to be able to understand the big picture. However, it is a much harder topic to grasp because it requires when you understand things you can't actually see, right? It's much more abstract, right? And there are a lot more like details, right? I like details. Details help me understand things, right? But it's also a lot of stuff to learn, right? So don't also fall into like a false sense of like, ooh, I'm doing pretty good after exam 1 and 2, because exams 3 and 4 will be probably pretty hard. I try and keep them about the same, but depending on your own personal kind of strengths and weaknesses, you might find them harder. Anyway, so really it's about those two things, right? What traits do you inherit, and what's the mechanism by which you inherit those traits and which those traits work, right? And so that's really kind of getting into these kind of terms, right? Again, molecular genetics is kind of like my turf. Transmission, so that works on the level of DNA or individual cells or maybe even tissues, right? If we're getting big scale. Transmission genetics is really at the level of individuals, right? You, your brother, your father, your daughter, things like that, right? What's the probability? There's a lot of math in transmission genetics, right? If my wife and I are heterozygous for a particular trait, what's the probability that one of my offspring will inherit a particular genotype and phenotype for that trait, right? A lot of it's math based. You know, if I have 2 kids, what's the probability that both of them will have it? Things like that, right? And then also evolutionary genetics, right, which is how things change over time, right? And these aren't exclusive domains, right? My PhD was arguably based on it was on the evolution of parasitism, so parasites in roundworms, which are super cool. And so even though it was all about molecular genetics, it was really looking at it within the context of evolution. So these aren't exclusive things. You need to be competent at more than one of these to be successful in whatever field that you're doing. And also it's worth pointing out that this is pretty young, right? So we've actually only really known what the material is that is inherited and how it's structured since the mid 50s, which is, 70 years, right? And really, we've only been able to manipulate that for, well, probably be about 30 years, give or take, right? The first cloned gene, which is for insulin, pretty sure was cloned in the early 90s. Before that, you had to kill a bunch of pigs and get the insulin from them, which obviously the pigs didn't appreciate too much, right? And even more recently, most of you have probably heard of CRISPR-Cas9, right? Our ability to genetically modify any organism almost that it works in, including humans. That's less than 10 years old, right? So this is, even though it might feel ancient, a very new and constantly changing subject, right? Now we're going to talk about this, blah, blah, blah. You've all seen that picture. Rosalind Franklin, arguably the person that discovered the structure of DNA, but unfortunately was at a conference when these people, Watson and Crick, visited her boss Morris Wilkins and stole her work, which is kind of a women's right thing. Really shitty thing to do. Thankfully, she's now been acknowledged for that. And then just some basic stuff, right? We'll be going over this in the next lecture period in about 15 minutes. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. Then there's a little bit on genomics, which is kind of not something that we touch on hugely here. But this is a different kind of scale, right? So often when people think of molecular genetics, they think of a single gene. How's that gene activated? What's its sequence? Genomics is looking at all of the DNA, not just all of the genes, right, which actually make up a relatively small part of your DNA or your genome, but the whole lot, right? And you can do all kinds of fun stuff with that, right? You can see how it changes. You can see how you will react to a particular chemotherapy drug. If you get cancer, for example, no longer do they just go, let's give him some of this, see if he dies or doesn't. And when you don't, does he still have cancer? Yes, well, let's give him something else then. Now we can actually look at your whole genome and look at other things which may control whether or not you react well to a particular drug, right? We can compare our genomes with the genomes of individuals that lived 10,000 years ago, 10 million years ago. Oh, that's telling me it's time to take a break. Snooze. So that's really kind of what genomics is about. It's kind of like molecular genetics, but on the whole genome scale. All right, so that's pretty much me done for, oh crap sticks. Sorry, my chat box had disappeared. I missed all of that crap. Oh, good. You can actually hear what I'm saying. It will be in anything pertinent, which I'm not sure there was, maybe, will be in the YouTube thing. Okay, so that's enough for now. Go stretch your legs. I'm probably going to make myself another cup of coffee. And I'll see you back here, kind of, but in the other Zoom link at 12:15. All right, so it won't be in this one, so don't leave this one open. I'm going to stop it. Open up the second one that I sent you in the announcement the other day. And I'll see you in 15 minutes.